Kære alle sammen, rigtig hjertelig velkommen her til Erik Sørensen Vinfestival anno 2021. Vi er rigtig glade for, at I vil deltage, og vi er rigtig glade for det her nye format, som gør det muligt at holde vores vinfestival, som vi af gode grunde ikke har mulighed for at gøre i sin fysiske form, men i stedet for her på skærmen. Til at hjælpe os igennem den her smagning med Domaine de Mourchon har vi ejer fra Domaine de Mourchon, Kate McKinlay. And it's a great pleasure, Kate, to have you here today. Despite the thunderstorm, you're just telling us about the electrical storm, but yeah, so happy to have you. And I'll start by passing over the word to you, so you can take us through this tasting introduction to the domain and yourself and your family. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here talking to you all. Of course, it's a second best pleasure. I'd much rather be up there in Crocodile, as the tradition goes. But hey, we do the best we can. So greetings from Provence, which is not today a typical Provence scene as you might remember it if you've been here or imagine it. We have had 45 millimeters of rain since midnight, and there is an electrical storm going on at the moment. So if I disappear suddenly, you know why. This is all good news for us when we get rain, of course, because we don't, I think, get quite as much as you do in the north, and we need it here very much. So it's very welcome. It's filling up the reserves for what will inevitably be a very dry summer. So we've recently planted some baby vines, so they are very much appreciating the rain. And the good news is we have Mistral forecast for the end of the week, which is the north wind that comes down the Rhone Valley and dries out all the vineyards. So that's good news for us. I'm just sorry that I couldn't take you out and show you a bit of the vineyard today. So what I will do is just remind you of who we are and where we are. I know a lot of you have been faithful drinkers of Domaine de Mourchon over the years. So we're in the southern Rhone Valley. In geographical terms, that's about an hour and a half north of Marseille, a couple of hours south of Lyon. In wine terms, that is the Kodun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very cleverly show you a little map and some images to give you an idea exactly of where we are, because we're going to taste the wine together later. But as you all know, to really understand a wine, you have to understand the place that it's come from. So let's go with finding that document. Hello, documents. There it is. Okay, so here we have a map of the southern Rhone Valley. You can see the Rhone River running from Montélimar in the north to Avignon in the south, and everything on the east bank. You will recognize those village names from those wine labels I'm sure you've been drinking. Now, this is the southern Rhone, the Côte de Rhône, is actually the oldest wine-growing region in France. So we are steeped in history. The Greeks planted the vines here first in the 4th century BC, and then, of course, there were the Romans, and then the monks came, and then the popes came from Rome, and they planted their vines in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. The first appellation in France was Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And what happens, of course, when you start to talk about quality and controlling the quality is a pyramid, a hierarchy of quality. So at the top sits the Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and then the next level in this hierarchy of quality, you have these other villages that you will recognize the names of. So Baume de Venise, Vaqueras, Gigondas, etc. And then the next level is the Kodun Village, of which we are one. So we are Kodun Village Séguret. You can see us here. and we're right next to Rasteau and Gigondas. And what that tells you about our appellation is that for you, the consumer, it is very interesting because we are sharing a boundary with the cru, like Gigondas. So Séguret shares a boundary with Gigondas, but we are not on the same level and not the same status and same price. So it becomes interesting for the consumer. Robert Parker called it the happy hunting grounds for the bargain savvy wine lover, the Kodun Village. So it's interesting to know. You can see that we're here next to Gigondas. We share the same massif, the same piece of land of limestone that comes out of the valley where the Untitled de Mourchon are. And we're, like Gigondas, we're up on the hill. We look down onto the Rhone Valley. We're at about 350 meters above sea level. There we are. You can just about see the Dontel starting in the background there. And so this is us. So you might wonder about my accent. I'm not originally from here. My parents, in fact, came here 25 years ago. They bought the land that was available. There was no winery here. It was a local family that was selling this land, the vines, with no winery. They had been growing the fruit and selling it to the co-op. They were selling the land because for them it was not productive. It was not financially viable. And that's because to get to our vineyards, you have to come up quite a steep hill. When you get here, you can see that the vines are planted on these very steep slopes, which makes working mechanically more difficult. But most negatively for the previous owners was the fact that the vines were old and therefore yielding very little. Okay, they were selling fruit to the co-op by weight, so they were interested in bigger yields. What my parents were looking for were lower yielding vines with a great terroir, okay, so that they could make a fine wine. And so they bought the vines, inherited the old vines, but were obliged to build this new winery. And you can see that they started from scratch. They built the winery into the hillside so that they could take advantage of the natural cooling, and to build it on 3 different layers so that we can work with gravity. That way the wine is protected as it's being made and it's less interventional. So what it means is we have the best of both worlds. We have these fantastic old vines and this modern winery. So what is it about our terroir that makes it so unique? Well, very steep slopes. And it's true they're not easy to work mechanically, but the advantage of steep slopes is better draining. On days like this, when the rain is falling considerably, it drains off easily. Also, the vines have better exposure to sun and air. So when the Mistral comes through later this week, it will very efficiently dry out the vines and prevent any kind of mildew or humidity caused diseases from starting. This means that this kind of terroir means that it's much easier for us to work organically than it is for wine regions like Bordeaux or Burgundy, where they have much more humidity. We have just last year got our organic certificate, and if you look at the organic farmers in France, you'll find a lot more in this region because of our terroir. We have these very extreme seasons because of our continental climate. So we have very hot, very dry summers. We also have this rather difficult stony soil. Okay, that means it's not very fertile. It's when the vines are planted, they have to work really hard to send their roots deep down, which is good because they get better nutrients down there. One of the most significant characteristics of our terroir is that we are at altitude, okay, 350 meters above the valley floor. Makes a big difference to temperatures in the summer. We can be 3 or 4 degrees cooler, especially at night. And that means that the grapes, as they're maturing, hold on to their natural acidity a lot more, and that gives freshness in the glass. It also means we're later ripening. We have some northeast facing slopes that you can see in this picture down here. And that, 25 years ago, we were a little bit concerned about whether they would reach maturity, the vines on these slopes. But now, after 25 years of climbing temperatures, we are very grateful to have later ripening terroir here. Okay, so this is
just one question, Kate.
Yes,
maybe we, here in Denmark, we've watched with grief in our hearts all these terrible spring frost damages in Burgundy, but also in the Rhone Valley. This altitude, high altitude you're talking about, does this help you in situations like this?
Conversely, it does. So in the summer, we have cooler temperatures thanks to our altitude. And in the colder period, we are saved from the frosts by the rising thermals, so the warmer air that goes up to altitude and the fact that the colder air goes down. So amazingly, we were spared of these terrible, unprecedented frosts in the area. We were touched a little bit by it. Only maybe we lost about 1 or 2 hectares or something, just in the areas which have which are very well protected from the air. So like in a fridge, the cold air descends, and yeah, just in the tiny little dips, there was a little bit of frost there. Unfortunately, a good deal of our colleagues, neighbours and friends in the area were less fortunate, and there is damage as we have never seen in this region. And because it's unprecedented, people aren't quite sure what's going to happen behind it. There is starting to be a second growth of vegetation. Is this going to produce fruit? Well, everybody's waiting to see. Yeah. So tricky times, definitely. And of course, these frosts are made worse by the fact that we have more mild winters and we have periods of unusual warmth, which accelerates growth as it did this spring. And then at the beginning, in the first week of April, we had those 3 very cold nights. So this is just to give you an idea of just how difficult our soil is. It's a classic mix of clay and limestone, so not terribly easy to dig into, as you can see, but in the sense of tough love to the vines, it means they work harder and they get the characteristics from the soil which gives the complexity to the wine. So the clay tends to give us those the structure and those powerful tannins that you can taste in our wines, and the limestone brings out the lovely aromatics, the fruit characteristic. So yeah, this is just an idea this is to let you know that we do very much have extreme seasons here. So it's not unusual to get snow in the winter, and it's very beautiful for it. And I can't do a presentation on Mourchon without mentioning our secret weapon, Sebastian, our winemaker, who has been with us for 21 years now and knows the terroir inside out, and is responsible for the success in the wines, I think. And oh, that's just a little tourist promotion for the area for when you get the green light to come back and visit us. It's not just wine here. We have this beautiful village. Our village is one of the most beautiful in France. Officially, it's classified as such. There it is, lovely medieval village. The Mont Ventoux for the cyclists, and of course the Roman ruins in our local town. So let me try and get you back. Am I back, Charles? Can you see me?
I can see you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can hear you loud and clear. Just one comment on the scenery of Séguret? It is a beautiful city. It's small, but it's a great place to visit. Maybe before we talk a little bit about the wine, it could be, you mentioned the Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which is probably the most well-known cru in the Rhone Valley. So maybe just to get an understanding of the differences, in your opinion, between a typical Châteauneuf microclimate and Séguret. Grapes are more or less the same, maybe, but what, in your opinion, is the bigger difference between the two?
Well, it's interesting because Châteauneuf-du-Pape is actually a big appellation, as you know, and there is quite some variation there. So there is a large part of the Châteauneuf-du-Pape that has a very similar geological makeup as ours, so this mixture of clay, limestone, and blue marl. But there is a part of Châteauneuf-du-Pape which has a sandy soil, which is closer to the river, okay? And so that's where it starts to differ from ours. So when you have more sandy soils, you get a little bit more finesse in the wines. So some of the Châteauneuf that are less structured, less tannic, they tend to come from the sandy soil. But also, I would say the biggest differences are altitude. Again, that's really what sets us apart from the region, and apart from Gigondas, who have the same situation as us. And as I say, 25 years ago, it was a question mark. So when my parents came here and they were looking at this land to buy, they fell in love with it because it was beautiful, but they couldn't actually taste the wine that came from this vineyard because, of course, it was all going to the cooperative, into the pot. So there was a bit of a question mark about whether the fact that we were up at altitude would be a disadvantage. Would we get that sort of sun-kissed ripeness that you get in the Châteauneuf-du-Pape and the appellation down on the valley floor? Well, I think there's no question now, as the temperatures rise, it's almost like those characteristics are coming up to us. So there are a lot of similarities. Different vintages do different things as well. So it's a complex subject.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I think a lot of Danish people have been traveling to the Rhone Valley, so have a lot of things to say about the area. Gigondas, perhaps, Séguret, maybe a bit less well known, but maybe in the future with the people coming to visit Domaine de Mourchon, they will realize that Séguret is actually a very nice place to be, close to Avignon, close to Vaison-la-Romaine. And
yeah, it is because of where we are. We're tucked away in a hidden valley above and behind our village. When people arrive here, there is that sort of feeling of having made a discovery. You know, it's kind of like a well-kept secret. Hopefully not too well kept.
For sure. But in order to not keep it a secret, maybe we should try the wine and present the wine. So if you could do that, I will
sure.
pour a glass for myself.
So we've got the tradition, okay? Now, why did we choose to call this particular cuvée of our wine tradition? Probably because it is, out of all our wines, the most typical and honest representation of its geography, of its terroir, okay? So it's a Séguret, Kodun Village, Séguret. It's a classic blend, majority Grenache. The blends round here, first of all, the majority of wines here are a blend, and they are always a blend involving Grenache and Syrah, and the Grenache is almost always in the majority. These two grape varieties just go together so well. They really do complement each other, tending to be greater than the sum of their parts. There's a little bit of Carignan in this one as well. The reason I say it is an honest representation is because it's had less. Sebastian will tell you that this wine is made in the vineyard. He does very little to it, okay? It comes from our 40-year-old on average vines, so quite some age on them, but not our oldest, so there's a good amount of concentration. And it is aged typically in concrete. Now, concrete is a very traditional material for aging wines from this region, used first by the Romans, so it's been around for a long time. It works like wood does. It's slightly porous, so it allows the wine to breathe with micro-oxygenation, as wood does, but unlike wood, concrete is neutral, so it's not going to change anything about the natural order of the wine. It's just going to let it express itself. Now, this is 2017, so just a little explanation about that vintage and those conditions. In the springtime of 2017, at the end of May, beginning of June, just as the grapes were starting to flower, we had some kind of crazy weather patterns with some quite dramatic changes in temperature and quite a bit of mistral. So this is the period that the grapes are at their most sensitive when they're flowering, particularly the Grenache. And if they're exposed to difficult weather conditions, they tend to shatter as they're flowering, and we lose quite a bit of the yield. And that's what happened in 2017. So it was an unusually low yield. What happened was, and then it was followed by a very hot and dry summer. So what we had were very small bunches, very few of these small bunches. The grapes themselves tended to be reduced in juice, but with thicker skins. So, and of course, the skins is where you have all the phenolics, the color, the tannin, the character that goes into the wine. So the overall characteristic of the 2017 is a very well-structured, very concentrated, age-worthy wine. So because of that, this year we aged the tradition in the concrete as usual, but then this one we finished for about 6 months in very large, or 70 hectolitre wooden tanks, just to take that extra tannic character, just to soften it a little bit. So as a result, what we have is really typical Southern Rhone, slightly darker fruits than perhaps on the 2016. But it's not just fruit, you're getting that lovely kind of mocha, that sort of slightly chocolatey, a little bit kind of cloves, spicy.
It's a super wine. It's a very good combination between very serious but also just having fun. The sweetness it's
yeah,
really...
I think so. So someone described this the other day as a country wine, exactly because it really expresses the place that it's come from. You know, it's not been over polished. It's not too sort of grown up and sophisticated, but it definitely represents the place. It has those lovely layers of depth to it. And I think particularly this 2017 and 17 is just, it just has so much depth and breadth and so much kind of message to it. I opened this bottle yesterday evening, and it's much more generous than it was straight away when I opened it. One of the characteristics of a 2017, because it's an age-worthy wine, is that they can be quite closed at the beginning. You have to kind of coax them out of themselves. So very important to open these in advance, air them, decant them, or whatever. Different to the 2016s, which kind of burst out of the bottle with lots of joie de vivre, but didn't necessarily have that same serious character that lasted quite a lot. I find it so interesting, the vintage differences. It's just kind of like different moods, you know, in the same wine.
But when you say age-worthy, what would that mean to you? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it whatever you like?
Officially, we've always said 5 years, 5 to 8 years for the tradition, because it does come from not our youngest, it comes from our middle-aged vines, and it doesn't have the oak aging on it. However, in certain years, it can go on and on. We tried and really enjoyed a 2006 tradition just recently. So if you forget about one of these in your cellar for 10, 15 years, don't worry about it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, definitely. Definitely.
Thank you. Well, one question that we do have the courage to ask you, because you're not French, but we had a very good video meeting with one of our friends from Spain, Albert from Montsant, and he said that Grenache or Grenache is of course originally from Barcelona. And so we have the courage to ask you, because you are in a Grenache area as well, but you're not French. But so maybe you could be honest and say, what is your opinion on that? Do you agree on that statement, or?
I think being British, I am the first person to claim to be an international person and get rid of all borders as far as I'm concerned. Grenache does not respect borders. Grenache just knows its best terroir. It's a Mediterranean grape variety. So it's an absolute, it's got so much resistance, you know, it has so many extremes thrown at it. When I look at the position of our old Grenache that is trained into gobelet, it's not put onto wires or anything like that. It stands up to extreme heat, extreme drought, extremely strong winds. I don't think you can claim it to one place. It's those conditions, definitely. And it suits the Mediterranean very well indeed. Yeah.
That's a super good response, and we'll pass it on to Albert.
It's dramatic.
Yeah. No, I think as a wrap up on this, it could be interesting just tasting this wine. If you could put a few words on what the different grapes does to the wine. You have talked about the sweetness and the richness of Grenache, and maybe just put the three grapes on the characteristics.
So going back to this famous marriage of Syrah and Grenache, the reason they do go together so well is because they complement for their differences. So the Syrah is the more noble of the varieties. It has the tannic structure to it. And the Grenache, certainly when it comes from younger vines, has less tannin of its own, but it has much more of the roundness. It will fill the blend. So an analogy that is often used is that Syrah is the skeleton, it's the bones, and the Grenache will be the flesh that goes onto the bones. Okay, and so that's why they are so beautiful together. Now, we've introduced Carignan into this blend because typically we don't soften the blend by aging in wood, and sometimes it can be quite powerful because of our old vines and our extreme heat. So the Carignan has an almost sort of not diluting but sort of softening effect, because the Carignan shares characteristics of both of these varieties, but it tends to be much lower. It has thinner skin, basically. It's lower in alcohol, lower in tannin, lower in colour, and so will just lighten a bit. So that explains why those three grapes are in together.
Super. Well, Kate, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you for this lovely wine. And maybe there's just one thing left to do for our very good friends and clients, and for you.
Cheers. And it's been a pleasure, but I really do look forward to getting back face to face and seeing you all again in the person. Let's hope it's before too long.
Fingers crossed, and until next time, cheers.
Santé. Bye.
Santé.